Welcome to our Week 3 lecture on diversity and privacy in our Human Resources course. So the first topic we're going to talk about is diversity. And when most of us hear the word diversity, we have certain preconceptions based on our understanding of the news, ideas that we've been presented to at work, social situations, and that sort of thing. Diversity in an HR setting has a compliance arm to it that we learned about a couple weeks ago with equal opportunity and affirmative action, but diversity initiatives usually go above and beyond just what compliance requires and are really trying to meet some of the advantages that having a diverse workforce, a diverse customer base can bring to a corporation, and that's what we're going to discuss here. Okay, so some of the reasons that we pursue diversity in our workforce is greater creativity. If you come from the Midwest with traditional Midwest values, we have a certain way of seeing things, a way of thinking, a work ethic, a series of ideals, and this just comes from the mix of the heritage, the weather, and there's a certain point of view that a lot of Midwesterners share. So if we brought in another employee from Central America, or maybe one from Africa or Europe, or even somebody that just came from even the South of the United States, they're going to have a different set of ideas and norms and behaviors and things that we hadn't even considered. So they come at the problem from a new angle, and we have enhanced problem solving. For example, I am not engineer minded, so my problem solving usually comes from how can the people adapt to what's current technology, whereas some of the engineers in our class might be looking at, well, why do the humans have to adapt? Let's adapt the technology and make our lives easier. So just having that mental diversity would help us enhance our problem solving abilities, which, as you know, can help things go faster and smoother and make a company more successful. If we are used to adapting to each other on that small scale with teams and having different points of view, we have greater system flexibility. So if your CEO decides tomorrow that they're going to do a major overhaul and you're used to adapting to people on a daily basis, you're more likely to adapt to larger ideas as well. So diversity helps with change management. And in today's day and age where we're changing faster and faster every year, this is really an asset that you can't put a price tag on. How open to change are your employees? The third bullet here is better information. My point of view earlier about somebody from the Midwest of the United States, somebody from Africa, somebody from Europe, they're going to have a different scope of knowledge, just things that they learn growing up that's standard to them. Having different religions, they're going to have more knowledge. Having different heritages, having different ages. We just have more knowledge in the room if we have a diverse set of people. You know, a word is brought up and half of us don't know what it means, and the other half of us are like, well, obviously that's this, this, and this. We have a bigger scope of knowledge when you have a greater set of diversity. And then the last one is a higher rate of return. There have been studies done on the fiscal rewards for diverse boards of directors. They don't know why, but the more diversity you have on your board of directors and the more women you have on your board of directors, the higher return of profit your company has. And it is statistically significant, like 3 standard deviations significant. And they think it's because of these first 3 bullets and other points of view, but they can't really nail it down into what the perfect formula is or exactly why. But when you find these ideas out, it just makes sense on why would you not expand and try to incorporate more diverse people into your team. With diversity comes challenges. And some of these are obvious. Some of them are less obvious and harder to overcome because they're not brought up. Stereotyping is the first one. When you're doing diversity training and you start talking about, well, all African Americans act this way and all Caucasians act this way and Hispanics have this personality, we are assuming that all members of a diverse group share all traits. There are certain facts that you can say about certain groups. You can talk about the biology of male versus female, And that is not stereotyping, that's a fact. Most diversity is not that cut and dry because you can be different races and still be considered Hispanic. So how are you going to attribute, so then which characteristics do they have? Do they have their race attributes or their ethnicity attributes? Are they both? How do they blend? This is a problem that I have actually seen in diversity training. The diversity trainers are uncomfortable with the topic because it is an uncomfortable topic when you start getting into why do we need to have diversity, because people start to feel like you're trying to replace them to hit quotas and issues, and they don't recognize that diversity is an all-inclusive idea. We need every single race, gender, ethnicity to have the best chance of enhanced problem solving, all those things I was just talking about on the previous slide. We want to make sure that we have individual and group fairness with diversity. A lot of companies have a one-size-fits-all performance plan. If you are a faculty professor level 2, then these are your criteria. You need to teach classes, you need to advise students, you need to have office hours, and those sorts of things. Well, what if the group already has a natural disadvantage? I can't work on Fridays because of my religious beliefs, but I'm willing to work on Saturdays and Sundays when other employees might have a religious obligation that they need to fill. So is it fair to say that our work week is Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and a blanket statement when it might be unfair to a group that can't work on a Friday? So some of these things are just flex weeks. That's something that we have used to increase diversity. I would like to work from 6 to 3 so I can be home when my kids get out of school. And there's no reason that the workload can't be shifted 2 hours earlier. So that would be giving fairness to an individual and a group. So that's what that one's talking about. Resistance to change. When I start talking about we're going to have diversity initiatives, we're going to start being more inclusive, we're going to try to hire from different candidate pools, because when we look around, we all have the exact same mind frame. And if we don't match our customer demographics, we have a problem internally with connecting with them. That's a fact. If you have no women employees and you're trying to sell women's hair care products, you're probably not doing a very good job because you're missing some insights from your demographic internally. The next one is interpersonal conflict. So that first idea of the benefits of we have multiple points of view and different spheres of knowledge is great in theory. In reality, it can be hard to get along with someone that you feel you have nothing in common with. You don't understand where they're coming from, how they got there, their point of view. You start having interpersonal conflict because you just don't feel like you have anything in common with this other person. And it can be really challenging to try to form a relationship when you have that issue. You also have fear and resentment potential of, I'm going to be replaced with somebody that fits a different diversity category that I don't. I'm a woman, they need more men. I'm white, they need more Asians. And you start having a fear of us versus them. And this is something that happens quite often if diversity is handled poorly. So you really want to make sure that, again, diversity is inclusive. If you have a race, a gender, an age, a religion, you are part of our diversity circle. So every human being should be part of your diversity plan. You should not just be targeting this age group, this religion, and that sort of thing, because that's when you get into fear and resentment. And then the last one is retention. So we do a big push to increase our diversity, and then they all quit. They work here for 2 or 3 years, and then they quit because they don't see any place for them to go. There are no women above the director level, so why would I stay when it's obvious I'm not going to get promoted? Glass ceiling kind of issues. You also have all those other bullets above. You hired me and I feel like the odd man out. No one talks to me. I don't feel like I have any friends. I don't have anything in common with your current work pool. So they quit. So that can be a challenge again if it's not handled correctly. So how do we improve our diversity the right way? The assignment you guys have this week is actually going to show you some of those things, and I'll actually post another video on that assignment with an example for you. But here's how we improve diversity. We build a culture that supports inclusion. This should not be a one-off. This should not be something that people sigh and roll their eyes about. It should be, we include everybody that needs to be included no matter what. It is really hard as a hiring manager to hire somebody that you don't feel you have anything in common with if they're going to be part of your team. But they can be some of your best employees. When I was a hiring manager, so actually working and not just in human resources, pulling strings for other people's work, I always wanted to hire people smarter than me because my goal was to replace myself so I could be promoted. And part of that for me was the challenge of recognizing that just because they don't have the traditional education that I had, it didn't mean that they weren't really intelligent. And in fact, I met some really, really fantastically smart people that had some college, 2 or 3 years. They went to a couple of different schools, but they never graduated. And they had just learned the most amazing things along the way. So that was one of my personal prejudices was to be smart, I need to see a degree. And I learned probably 10 years into my career that most jobs did not actually require a degree. They required the knowledge, and college didn't necessarily mean they had the knowledge, and vice versa was also true. You need commitment from top leadership. Diversity is not cheap to start up. There are costs associated with it, and we are a reflection of our leaders as a culture. If our leaders believe that diversity is important and we should be inclusive, it trickles down. If you think about who the leader of your company is, most of their personality traits are seen in your culture. If they're a hard worker, you probably have work ethic kind of a culture. If they are very pragmatic, you probably don't have a lot of time to get into innovation and wishful thinking if you can't do a return on investment statement. So the same thing comes with diversity. You have to have a senior leader, someone from the C-suite. So your chief financial officer, your CEO, your chief whatever officer. You need the highest level to commit and be a figurehead and voice about why diversity matters from the top level. You have to have good diversity training programs. You need to make sure that they are not a one-off. You take a diversity training on your year anniversary, you check off that you did it in Skillsoft, and you never think about it again. That is a really bad diversity training program. It needs to be a little more involved, a little more entwined with their work, and really have a feel like it's not just I'm sitting through a training. It's part of my job. I see it everywhere. Another idea is an employee resource group. These have a lot of different names at different companies. These are groups for diverse employees to get together with like-minded employees. So you have women's engineering group. You have student workers groups. You have African American groups. You have Christian Leaders Association. It is really just normally like a monthly lunch meeting or maybe an after work meeting where they can socialize and get to know employees on a personality trait that matters to them. And then the next one is mentorships and apprenticeships. If you look around for somebody to mentor you, whether you're doing it formally or informally, you will naturally gravitate to people that you see yourself in them. You think, I want to be just like that person. And part of that is usually external diversity. Their race, their gender, their ethnicity, their religion. And that's what naturally gravitates you to them. First thing is usually they have a job you want, and that's the main reason you start pursuing it. But if you have 3 or 4, let's say senior directors are the role that you want to pursue, and you're looking for a mentor to help you get to that level, and there are 4 of them, you will probably pick the one that matches your personality. You pick another extrovert, you pick another introvert, you pick another female, you pick another Hispanic. You are going to have that. So if you don't have diversity at the higher levels, you're going to have a problem getting your younger employees to retain, which was one of the challenges from before. So you really need to make sure that you have these programs available and do a good job matching people. If you have a formal mentorship program in place, you want to make sure that when a mentor or an apprentice, a mentee, is they're sometimes called, are signing up for the formal process, that they mark what is important to them. Do they want external diversity matches? Do they want personality matches? Do they want religion matches? When I found my last mentor, I was looking for another successful parent. I didn't care male or female. I wanted to know how to balance a 60-hour work week that had 30% travel with having a husband and a daughter that I really wanted to spend time with, and how to get that balance right and how to be successful at both. So that's what I was looking for in a mentorship. The rest of it didn't matter. Honestly, I didn't care about gender. They just really had to be a parent that was working those kind of hours. So you can see how where you are in your life, your mentor relationship might change. The last one to get really strong diversity is to hold management responsible for the success of programs. You put your money where your mouth is. If you're saying diversity is going to make or break us, we have to be more strategic with our hiring, with our customers. You need to hold your managers responsible for that. And the way you can do that is not, hey, make sure you hire this race, this ethnicity, this gender, this age, because that's illegal. What you want to do is once they've hired, you look at their job satisfaction scores, their worker flexibility, their retention scores, and you make sure that you don't have a single demographic that's not measuring well. You also would have on the HR side, you would have some of that tracking on who we're hiring and who we're promoting, but you don't have managers doing that because you really still want the best person hired and promoted, and you don't want them thinking through, well, I don't really have any African American women on my team, so maybe I should promote her so my diversity scores look better. You do not want that to happen. So you just have them doing what they should be doing anyways, and then you're just tracking to make sure that all the women on the team hate her. Okay, that's a problem. We need to maybe train on how to manage women because it is different than how to manage men, and we can do focused training for that manager. Okay, so here's some diversity training best practices, because this is really where companies fail. You have to confront the complex issues such as race, gender, religion, etc. You have to make people talk about the stereotypes they have of certain races, genders. You have to build a trust level in that room that we are discussing the concerns that society has, and then we'll share the facts and what diversity actual is. So this can be done a number of different ways, but it has to be done. You cannot just say, we're going to include everyone, kumbaya, have a good day. You can't. You have to talk about the benefits and the strengths of all of these different ideas. The training, if you are having them come in, sit in a classroom and do a training, it needs to be scheduled at an off-peak time. You don't want this, I'll use the university setting. You don't want this in week 10 when everyone's scrambling to finish their final projects and nobody really has the mental bandwidth to learn something new and be open and receptive to the training. So you're not going to want it to have the end of the month, and banking is a horrible time. You're not going to want to have it right at shift change for healthcare because all they're thinking about is turning their patients over to the next shift and that sort of thing. So you need to make sure that you are doing this at off-peak times. And some industries and companies struggle with that, and their employees aren't engaged while they're sitting in the training. Either they're actually multitasking and not really listening, or they're mentally back at their desk thinking about that project that has a due date of tomorrow. If the employees think that we are only doing this training because of an external pressure, they may resist. So there's a big change in the news about the influx of Muslim immigrants into the United States, and we need to adapt and include them, and Syria is going through a lot of struggles and they have so many immigrants, we should make a place for them. And then we schedule a diversity and inclusion training the next day. There's going to be this is political, this isn't a real thing, this is a trend, this is a fad. So we have to be cognizant of what's happening in the world. Even though we had this training mentally scheduled for 6 months, we may need to push it if we don't want it to appear that we're doing this training because of political or external motivations. You cannot set the training up as perpetrators or victims. Women have always had a tough time in the workplace and they don't get equal pay, and men are the problem. Everyone in that room is going to become defensive. You're going to have women that are going to say, I don't have any problems, and men that have said, I never have held a woman back in any way. You cannot do us versus them, perpetrators versus victims. It really can set you up for a bad scenario with the employees. If you only focus on a few instances of diversities, others may feel left out. So if you only talk about race and then you only talk about minority races, you can make people feel left out. Same thing if you talk about age and you're looking around the room and you realize you have an aging workforce. You know that just from your company demographics, and you're talking about all the benefits of millennials and you've got a lot of baby boomers sitting in the room, you can really alienate them quickly. You want to make sure that you are not using standardized training materials that are simplistic and ineffective. They're not speaking to your demographics. They're ridiculously vague. They're basically like, this training that I'm giving you, I haven't given you any meat, any real reason on who I should be connecting with or why it matters. It's all generic, and you could forget it in 5 minutes if it was a company-specific training. So in my example for your diversity program, you'll see some of the more meatier topics that you should adapt for your program. There are 2 big warnings and pitfalls that we've talked about. The second one a little bit. You want to make sure you are not promoting stereotypes. When you confront complex issues, you want to make sure that you're discussing race, but you're not stereotyping racial attributes to the group. And then white male bashing. This is the biggest one that happens in diversity training. The white man's been holding us down all this time. Just because there has been a society of this was white men built this country does not mean that current workers that fit that demographics have any different needs than any other employees. And when you don't talk about the white male demographic, it is to that point above, they feel left out. And this is everyone but us, because historically we've had a leg up, so we now need to make room. And it really, really quickly can turn into an ugly scenario if you get anywhere close to white male bashing. And I've never seen an overt training where the trainer is talking about how bad the white male executive treats the rest of the staff and why they're the problem. It's never said overtly. It's always in what's not said. So those are the 2 big pitfalls that you have in diversity training, is leaving folks out and then stereotyping all the big groups. Hopefully that helps with how to set up a diversity training best practice. From diversity, we get into intercultural training. This can be part of your diversity initiative, especially if you're a multinational company or you're a company that sells globally. You do need to understand these different intercultural traits. You want to have that competency to speak clearly to other nationalities and other cultures. And it really is an extension of the domestic diversity programs that we were talking about earlier. You want to know the customs and traditions in other countries. If I walk up to someone in a business meeting, should I bow? Should I shake their hand? Should I shake their hand with both of my hands and grasp their forearm? Should I make eye contact? Should I not make eye contact? You need to know these things so you're not offensive unintentionally. You need to know the societal norms. You need to make sure that in some countries, you have to address the senior member of the team first, or you've ruined the whole meeting. So if you just walk to the person closest to you and introduce yourself, and they happen to be a middle-ranking person, you've offended the whole team. So you need to make sure you understand that. You need to make sure you know what language they're speaking, and at least make a gesture of learning how to say hello and good morning in their language, or something. Not, well, I'm going to Brazil, so I'm going to learn Spanish. Well, most people in Brazil speak Portuguese, so maybe you should have done a little bit more research to see what language they actually speak and not assume. Religions can have a huge impact in certain countries. There are at least 30 countries that are religious-based law. Most of the Middle East is that way. And then there are other countries where religion also plays a major component, where you would need to know that I can't shake a rabbi's hand because he can't touch me because I'm not his wife. So if I was going to a meeting with a rabbi and I didn't know that, I've then caused an awkward situation by trying to touch a holy man when I'm not his wife. So that's something that I would need to be aware of if that scenario might come up in my work dealings. Timeliness. America, as a norm and a stereotype, I know we just said avoiding stereotypes, but as a stereotype, we're prompt people. If the meeting starts at 2, the meeting starts at 2. Certain places, most of Latin America and South America, if the meeting starts at 2, 2:30 is fine. It's around 2. That's one of the issues. They show up late 30 minutes to a meeting. I will be offended that it didn't matter to them. They weren't respecting my time. And to them, they don't see a problem at all. This also happens often in Middle Eastern countries. Interpersonal space. We in the United States prefer roughly 3 feet. So if you picture yourself holding a hula hoop, that's roughly how much personal space we want around us when we're talking to a work person. That's when we are comfortable. We feel that they're standing the right distance away. They're not too close. They're not too far away where I feel like I can't hear them. In Asia, they want more than 3 feet. They want you standing really kind of far away, so there's no chance that they might accidentally touch you and offend you in any way. Whereas the Middle East and certain Hispanic cultures can be as close to 18 inches. So that's like a foot away. That would make me very uncomfortable to have somebody standing that close to me, but that's their perception of this is the right space to have between each other to have a conversation about work. So you need to make sure that you're aware of those things. So when somebody comes and stands right next to you, you don't take a step back and offend them. You want to make sure that you find that happy medium of where is the right distance away from somebody to have a conversation. You also want to make sure that you're not using ethnocentrism, which is the way my culture is the best culture, and I'm going to look at every other culture I encounter from that point of view. In the United States, we're predominantly Christian, so we feel that marriage is a 1-to-1 ratio. There should be 2 people in a marriage. So when we go to other countries where multiple wives is a standard, we're not looking down and judging them from our point of view. You need to go in with their cultural point of view and make sure that you are not putting our American point of view and then judging through another culture. And the last one is nonverbal symbols. So this is one where you might not realize that certain gestures have a bad connotation. For example, the OK symbol means profanity in 3 different languages. So saying okay to somebody with, the O and your three fingers up here is okay. And in other countries, you're basically telling them that you think they are a bad name. So you want to make sure that you understand when they're telling you no, are they shaking their head back and forth like we do? Or are they using their finger? Or are they wagging their head from side to side, which means kind of? You need to make sure that you understand the nonverbal symbols. The good news is most of the stuff is we can Google it these days to see what we should expect when so if you type in work norms in Brazil, for example, you should be able to get an idea for most of this so you know what to expect. And that is something that you really want to make sure you have in place because you don't want to ruin a relationship because you didn't know these things. So HR should be training on these kinds of topics for their employees that have to deal with it. All right, our next topic is workplace privacy. So while you're at work, what exactly are your rights? When should you feel like you are definitely, this is private, this is mine, versus this is a work space or property and they can or cannot have access to it? There's a lot of content, I know. So you want to balance the company property use and business operations versus employee rights. Internet and email, you basically have no protections. You cannot say, well, this is my computer. You can't search my search history. You can't read my emails. Yes, I can. They're actually our emails that we just assigned to you. We can search your office and your desk at will, even locked desk drawers, because it's our desk. You are working in the company, and these have been, again, assigned to you. You can be personally searched at the end of the shift. So this happens more in secure areas. For example, if you were to work at one of the mints where they make the money, they are searched at every single shift to make sure they're not smuggling out new $20 bills. And that is allowed because you could be taking property. Cameras are allowed, but not where they're personally invasive. So they shouldn't be in the restroom. And if they are in the restroom, they need to have a compelling reason and not in the stalls where you are actually using the restroom. So if they have like a lounge area, they might be in there, but they really need to have a compelling reason, legally compelling, not voyeuristically compelling, and they'll really have to explain it to a judge. So most companies just won't have cameras in the restroom. And then there are certain other places, for example, having a nurse's station at a company is a new trend in human resources as a benefit, and they wouldn't really have them in there because that's private matter where you're talking to a healthcare professional and it's privileged and you could be compromised in a state of undress or embarrassment. There is one law, the Electronics Communication Privacy Act. We must inform employees their calls and voicemails are being monitored. This is usually done via a handbook or a training. Some companies, every time you pick up the phone and as it's like ringing to the person will say, reminder, this call will be monitored. And you need to know that it's there. They should not listen when they realize it's a personal call. So if you are calling your spouse from work and as soon as they realize it's your spouse, they should stop screening it. But if while they're screening it and they haven't realized it's your spouse, because you're not like, hello, husband, at the beginning of the call, you just, hey, and start talking and whatever casual conversation, and you say something about how you just stole 20s from the mint, they can still use that against you. The voicemails are more, that's actually been litigated on much more because they are intended as a one-to-one communication and they're normally password protected. But again, it is a company voicemail. It's just been assigned to you. If you are informed that your calls are monitored, it was probably just once and you may or may not have thought about it again. If you have a job that you interact with customers, there's a good chance that they're monitoring those calls for training and compliance purposes. If you think about when you call into a company and they're telling you that this call may be recorded for quality and training purposes, That means that employee that's talking to you knows that their calls are being recorded. They were informed once, hopefully multiple times. Post-hiring drug screening. We have a limited scope. Because this is privacy, we are invading your body. Sometimes, actually, because we're making you donate blood or hair, we're forcing you to do that. Usually it's urine. If the work is dangerous, I can drug test you at any time because it's dangerous and I'm protecting you from yourself. If drug activity is suspected, slurred speech, they seem to be stumbling, they seem to be off balance, we can do probable cause drug screening. If a drug-related accident has occurred, so you were in an accident at work, you were found to have drugs in your system, I can then screen you whenever I want because you've shown that you're a problem in the past and you're still here. Or if you have been in a drug rehab program that the company is aware of, we can screen you again. Again, you've proven that you are a problem in the past. We have probable cause to screen you again. All of these are allowed because of the business operations and the company property use. So the next part of privacy is your personnel file. It should be kept confidential and need to know. And then it's parsed out in parts. Your supervisor can see your performance because they need to see, well, how did I give their annual review last year so I know what to do this year? How many times have they been written up? How many times have they received Employee of the Month? They might not need to see your salary. They definitely don't need to see your medical records and those sorts of things. So we might give supervisors limited access. Human resources can see all files because they are the keepers of the files. So they really need to see everything. Hiring managers can usually see team salaries, both past and present, because we need to know what we are paying people to make a fair offer. Sometimes these are coded where I can't see, well, Tammy makes $40,000 and Mary makes $58,000. I can just see employee 1, employee 2, employee 3 and their salaries. Medical records are kept separate from work records. So if I hand you your personnel file, there's probably a separate medical file if you've ever given reason to have a medical file at work. Supervisors are allowed access to disability accommodations. So if you are telling the company that you have a disability that you need accommodations for, we obviously have to tell your supervisor so they understand the kinds of accommodations being requested and the reason why. So if you ask for a new accommodation, they understand the scope and the context and they know what steps to take. The only reason your company would have your medical records, well, there's a couple actually, that your company would have your medical records is if you're self-insured. So some companies go through Blue Cross Blue Shield, and your employer would not know any of your medical stuff unless you're asking for leave. You have to supply paperwork for certain kinds of insurance, your short-term disability, long-term disability. You have it's sometimes called a cafeteria plan, where basically you're using pre-tax money for health-related costs and expenses. That would all be stuff in your medical file. And if you're self-insured, they have everything. Every time you go to a doctor and you have a copay, because they're the ones that are your insurance. So they would have all the stuff that normally you would think of Blue Cross having or Badger Care having. They would have all of that. And they would need to have that in a separate filing area. So as a Wisconsin employee, you can ask to view your personnel records twice a year. Usually your employer is going to ask you to do that in writing, and they're going to give themselves a couple of days to comply. And not all records are covered. I gave you the link here if you want to see exactly what you can and cannot see. And if you are suing your company, your scope of what you can see is most definitely going to shrink because the law allows for them to protect themselves in case of a lawsuit situation. So employee privacy, basically two things. What can the employer search, review, access? And then how are your personnel files kept secret and confidential from your employee, coworkers, that sort of thing. So those are the two facets of privacy.